Behind the gilded gates of Kensington Palace, behind the cameras, behind the curated smiles and perfectly pressed designer gowns, there was another world. A world that very few people were allowed to speak about. Until now, they signed NDAs. They were warned to stay silent. Some left their jobs shaking, others left in tears. But the stories, the things they witnessed behind closed doors, never fully went away. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what it was really like to work for Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, through the eyes of former household staff who were there when the cameras were off. What they describe is shocking. To understand what these staffers experience, you first have to understand what Meghan Markle has carefully constructed, a flawless public image. From her Netflix lifestyle series with Love, Meghan, to her luxury brand As Ever, Jams, Teas, Wildflower Honey, to her upcoming return to Hollywood in a major comedy film, Meghan has spent years building a persona of warmth, grace, and authenticity. When she was filmed in Pasadena working on the upcoming movie Close Personal Friends, sources told People magazine that she introduced herself to everyone and was very sweet and down-to-earth. That is the Meghan the world sees. But the Meghan described by former palace staff? A very different picture. And the story begins, as it so often does in royal circles, inside the walls of Kensington Palace. The year? 2018. The Duchess had been married to Prince Harry for just months. And already, cracks were beginning to form. In October 2018, a senior royal aide did something that would echo through headlines for years to come. His name was Jason Knopf, the communications secretary for Kensington Palace, a trusted, experienced professional who had worked in the royal household since 2015. He sent an email, not to the press, not to the public, but to Simon Case, Prince William's private secretary at the time. In that email, Knopf laid out what he described as very serious problems. He wrote, and these are his words, "I am very concerned that the Duchess was able to bully 2 personal assistants out of the household in the past year. The treatment of name removed was totally unacceptable." He continued, "The Duchess seems intent on always having someone in her sights. She is bullying name removed and seeking to undermine her confidence. We have had report after report from people who have witnessed unacceptable behavior." And then came the line that perhaps matters most. "I remain concerned that nothing will be done." Nothing was done at the time. Knopf left his role the following month. That email stayed buried until March 2021, when it was leaked to the Times of London. The timing? Just days before Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah Winfrey for their landmark interview. The explosion that followed was immediate. Buckingham Palace announced a formal investigation into the bullying allegations. Meghan's team called it a calculated smear campaign, and the world divided, as it always does when Meghan Markle is involved. But what did the investigation find? That's where the story gets deeply interesting. Because in June 2023, Buckingham Palace confirmed that the investigation had concluded, and then announced they would not be publishing the findings. The results were buried, sealed, never made public, which raises a question. Why? Buckingham Palace may have sealed its report, but the people who worked alongside Meghan Markle could not seal their memories. One of those people is Samantha Cohen, a Buckingham Palace staffer for nearly 20 years. She served as Meghan's private secretary, the most senior advisor a royal can have. She was there, inside the household, watching, managing, trying to hold things together. In a rare interview with Australia's Herald Sun, Cohen revealed something quietly devastating. She confirmed she was one of 10 members of staff questioned as part of the palace investigation. And then she said this, almost in passing, but the weight of it is enormous. She said, "I was only supposed to stay for 6 months, but stayed for 18. We couldn't find a replacement for me." Let that sink in. The most senior aide in the household stayed 18 months past her intended departure, not because she wanted to, but because no one else would stay long enough to replace her. The staff turnover in the Sussex household was, by every account, extraordinary. Aide after aide, assistant after assistant. They came, they worked, they left, off within months. By the time Meghan and Harry relocated to California, the pattern had followed them across the Atlantic. In 2024, The Hollywood Reporter published a deep dive piece that pulled together accounts from multiple sources. The headline: Why Hollywood Keeps Quitting on Harry and Meghan. The sources quoted were damning. One said, "Everyone's terrified of Meghan. She belittles people. She doesn't take advice." Another, "They're both poor decision makers. They change their minds frequently." And then, perhaps the most brutal description, one source said she marches around like a dictator in high heels, fuming and barking orders, and that they had watched her reduce grown men to tears. These aren't anonymous internet trolls. These are people who worked in the room. But let's talk about the household staff specifically, the people closest to the daily, domestic reality of life with Meghan. In the world of royal households, the domestic staff, housekeepers, personal attendants, household managers, see everything. They are invisible by design, present in every room, witnesses to every mood, every moment, every explosion behind closed doors. And what emerged from multiple sources, across multiple outlets, paints a picture that is deeply at odds with the Duchess of Sussex's public persona. Author Valentine Lowe, who spent years investigating the inner workings of the palace and published his findings in the 2022 book Courtiers, The Hidden Power Behind the Crown, collected testimony from former insiders. One account described what happened when a staff member received an after-hours call. They had stepped out for dinner. A Friday night, a normal evening. What followed was anything but, the source recalled, every 10 minutes, they had to step outside the restaurant to be screamed at. The calls went on for hours. "I can't believe you've done this. You've let me down. What were you thinking?" There were no off hours, no limits. Last thing at night, first thing in the morning, the source said, "You could not escape them." And then Lowe quoted something else from another insider. That became a line everyone repeated. There were a lot of broken people. Young women were broken by their behavior. These young women came to serve the royal family. They were not prepared for what they found. Even Prince Harry, in his memoir Spare, while defending Meghan from the bullying label, admitted something crucial. He wrote, "Nerves were shattering. People were sniping. More than once, a staff member slumped across their desk and wept." Harry blamed the culture at Kensington Palace. But the staff who spoke to reporters pointed the finger in a different direction entirely. Some might say, well, the palace was a pressure cooker. Royal life is extreme. Maybe it was the environment. Except the pattern didn't stop when Meghan left royal life. It followed her to Hollywood, to California, into the world of media and entertainment. When Meghan launched her podcast Archetypes on Spotify, a deal reportedly worth tens of millions of dollars, sources close to production spoke to Vanity Fair in January 2025. What they described was a working environment shaped by anxiety, unpredictability, and fear. One source involved in production described the experience as really, really, really awful, very painful. They said Meghan was constantly playing checkers, very aware where everybody is on her board. And when you are not in, you are to be thrown to the wolves at any given moment. The podcast lasted one season. The Spotify deal collapsed in 2023. Staff reportedly gave Meghan a nickname behind her back. It spread to the production. It was scathing. It was a kind of nickname that only gets invented when people feel they cannot speak the truth out loud. And then there are the publicists. In December 2025, Meredith Maines, Meghan's chief communications officer, announced her departure. She had been in the role for less than a year. She was, by most counts, the 11th member of the Sussex communications team to leave in just 5 years. 11 publicists. 5 years. The revolving door has never stopped spinning. Now, fairness demands we acknowledge this. Meghan Markle is not without defenders, and the story is not without complexity. When the Hollywood Reporter published its 2024 piece, a wave of current and former staff pushed back. Several employees gave interviews to Us Weekly speaking warmly of Meghan as a boss. Her then head of communications praised her publicly. There are those who believe the bullying narrative has been weaponized, that it was first deployed strategically by forces within the palace to undermine Meghan at her most vulnerable. The timing of the original email leak, days before the Oprah interview, was suspicious to many. And Meghan supporters point to the palace's sealed investigation as potentially exonerating, arguing that if the findings had confirmed serious wrongdoing, there would have been far more consequence. Author and commentator Amanda Matta has written that burying the investigation could mean one of two things. Either the findings didn't support the allegations, or they revealed uncomfortable truths about palace workplace culture that the institution itself didn't want publicized. Royal households, after all, have long had a toxic underbelly. The dignity at work policy reference in the palace's investigation statement only existed because it had been necessary. The truth, as always, likely lives somewhere in the complicated middle. But the sheer volume of voices across continents, across years, across industries, describing the same experiences with the same person, is hard to dismiss entirely. Today, Meghan Markle is in perhaps the most active phase of her reinvention. Her lifestyle brand as ever is growing. She's returned to film acting in Close Personal Friends alongside Brie Larson and Henry Golding. She and Harry are preparing for a tour of Australia, their first visit in 7 years. The public face is polished. The Instagram aesthetic is perfect. The brand message is warmth, authenticity, joy. But the questions from former staff have not gone away. And now, as Meghan steps back into the Hollywood machine, with new teams, new contracts, new collaborators, those who know what happened behind the scenes in Kensington Palace, in the Netflix studios, in the Spotify recording booths, are watching. Some are still bound by NDAs. Others have spoken in fragments, to reporters, to authors, in anonymous quotes that ripple through the royal press like aftershocks of something that was never fully resolved. Jason Knopf, the man who wrote that original email, resurfaced in a high-profile television interview in early 2025. He said he had no regrets. Samantha Cohen, the aide who stayed 18 months longer than she intended, hasn't elaborated further. But what she did say, quietly, almost under her breath, told a story all its own. The housekeeper, the personal assistants, the young women who arrived full of hope and left, according to insiders, broken. They haven't all spoken. Most never will. But the ones who have, their words have lasted far longer than any press statement, any Netflix special, any jar of wildflower honey. What do we make of all of this? Is Meghan Markle the villain that tabloids have made her out to be, a calculating, cruel woman who leaves broken people in her wake? Or is she a high-achieving woman who has been held to a standard that no man in her position would ever face, labeled difficult for the same assertiveness that would be called leadership in someone else? The answer may be both. It may be neither. It may be something more complicated than either camp wants to admit. What we know for certain is this. Behind the cameras, behind the Netflix specials and the brand launches and the perfectly curated Instagram posts, there are real people, people who worked hard, gave their best, and came away from the experience with stories they cannot forget. Some of those stories are finally being told, and something tells me we haven't heard the last of them. If you made it this far, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the royal stories that the mainstream media buries. And drop in the comments, do you believe the staff accounts, or do you think this is all a coordinated smear campaign against Meghan? I'll see you in the next one.